the arrest of Don Lemon, everything that's happening right now in Minnesota, it does tie into a lot of the work we're working on.
We announced the cert petition we have filed at the Supreme Court asking them to take a case that involves defamation in CNN. And the goal of that case is to try to get clarity, maybe update to a precedent called New York Times versus Sullivan, which has really built up this impenetrable wall for journalists, for media, saying that they can never really be charged with defamation because there's this intent level that has to be reached. And so for a long time, they have had a much broader, much more leeway than even other people within the First Amendment that can be sued for things like this. So this is a case, Dershowitz versus CNN, that the ACLJ brought right at the end of December. CNN has officially waived their right to respond to our cert petition, which is interesting, meaning they are not putting up a defense of why the Supreme Court should not take it in at this stage of the game. Now, does that because they believe that it's not going anywhere? Maybe. Is it because they are just fine with it moving on and want to try to impact case law? We don't know that. But it is a very interesting development today as we continue to fight in court. This, I think, goes back to what the whole discussion is that journalists in the United States right now, especially if you are with a big organization, have these even more heightened protections. It is within the same amendment as regular freedom of speech, freedom of worship. We know this, freedom of assembly. But the freedom of the press category seems to have, whether it be through Supreme Court precedent or through other actions, this more heightened protection where normal citizens exercising their First Amendment right would not be able to just defame.
Yeah, people for so many years have called me personally when maybe a hit piece comes out on them or their family or their organization and filled with lies, filled with half-truths. And they've called me, in tears often or not sure what to do, spinning out of control because they feel like their lives are being ruined by lies. And, in any other circumstance, I'm usually able to say, well, we'll take up your case. Let's go work on it. Let's go do it. When it comes to, like Will said, the broad, almost immunity that journalists have, and that really big news organizations have, to spin a half-truth or a lie, even when they knowingly know it to be untrue, has been broadly protected. So I have to have these weird conversations where I bring a lawyer on a phone call and I kind of have to say, especially if you're a public figure, there is not much you can do. We can take this to court. It's going to cost a lot of money and a lot of years of your time, and likely you're going to lose because, as Will said, it has had this really broad sense of immunity, especially in the last decade. But that is where the ACLJ has finally had an opportunity to step in and make these adjustments to where at least they can't continue repeating known lies. And I believe there's a good chance that we win this and we see a massive change in the way reporters are held accountable. So where I do think there is broad immunity in terms of, or there's definitely a broad scale of what freedom of journalism is, and when you're there as a journalist and covering what you need to cover, I do think there is an opportunity to limit the lies. And it's not about opinions. A lot of these are stated as facts. They're stated as just what's going on. They're never even caveated often. Or a correction comes out later on and it's buried and never seen. There's a lot that can be done in that.
I want to play this also because it ties back to the Don Lemon story, where the voicing an opinion and showing where you're at on this issue, and I think it gives you an insight into what his motives were there. But this is bite 9. This is after the fact. After we saw what happened, after he refused to leave when the pastor asked him to, he was on the I've Had It podcast and talked about what his thoughts are on that church, of which I don't know if he did any research on that church, if he knew any of the people there, but it's this casting them and defaming the people there in a wide sense. Now, he does say, I think, it's his opinion, but the ability for a journalist to just feel so comfortable saying this out loud after saying I was just there to chronicle this is shocking. This is bite 9.
And there's a certain degree of entitlement. I think people who are, in the religious groups like that, it's not the type of Christianity that I practice, but I think that they're entitled, and that entitlement comes from a supremacy, a white supremacy. And they think that this country was built for them, that it is a Christian country, when actually we left England because we wanted religious freedom. It's religious freedom, but only if you're a Christian and only if you're a white male, pretty much. And so, yeah, I absolutely 100%, but it's an intimidation tactic. And, I said, I don't understand how I've become the face of it when I was a journalist. I do understand that I'm the biggest name there. And I'm also, as I was on with my producers this morning, you and Kylie talk all the time. My producers were saying, I said, how did I become the face of this? And my producer said, Don, you're a gay black man in America.
And once again, this is him ascribing motives for people there on a Sunday that were participating in a worship service. That is white supremacist because they were not at protests on Sunday morning. It is such a twisted, demonic mindset that he so comfortably spews that, religious groups, it's not the type of Christianity I practice. And we know that his type of Christianity is worship through journalism, I think, is what we took from the church service. But once again, he's just sitting there defaming and chastising these people on a liberal podcast by saying that they are effectively white supremacist and that they don't want others to have religious freedom. He knows nothing of the intention or the hearts of these people.